thank you for joining us for it, and I hope it will be an energetic conversation about the detail of shaping investment flows, the ocean's imperative for the global south. I'm delighted that we're joined by representatives from a very large swathe of the global context across from Malaysia, Brazil, Greece, Poland, and Turkey, and indeed, of course, in my case, the UK. The theme of this conference has been the great churn in the ocean in Indian mythology, and there's a similar great churn happening in geopolitics in the current context, and so I'm excited to dive into it. Brief housekeeping. We will have a conversation on the panel for the initial part, and then we'll reserve 15 minutes at the end to open up the conversation for Q&A. And the main ask and requirement is to keep all questions very brisk and concise, along with a brief introduction of your name and organization. But we'll come back to that later. For now, can I just start by going first to Harry Theoharis, Member of Parliament for Greece. Harry, Greece is, of course, at the heart of the conversation on oceans, and in particular on investment and shipping. And you've been in context of having seen how incentives can shape investment flows in different directions. As the geopolitics in our world is changing, how do you think about both Greece's outlook and the broader outlook on what will really drive investment flows?
Thank you, first of all, for... Is that working? Yeah. Well, thank you for the kind invitation to speak here. Shipping is a very, very complex industry and depends on many factors being just at the right time. We had the discussion about the same thing with tourism. One of the things that I've dealt with in the past, I was the ex-Minister of Tourism of Greece, among other things. So those are two industries where a lot of things have to come together to ensure that it's well functioning and a country has enough clout to be able to operate from a position of strength. Of course, a big important part for the Global South is to ensure that there's wider FDI happening. And if we look at the numbers of India, for example, 10 years ago, 2013, we had 24 billion worth of FDI, about 1.5% of the global pie. And last year, in 2023, we had 90 billion and 6%. So that is a big increase. And this is the first thing that has to happen, that has to continue happening in order to be able to have the aspirations to also be a big part in the shipping and the trade routes. Now, of course, investment and production capability is one part of the end. The other is consumption. So there will always be a big part in the north, I guess, because that's where most of the consumption is. However, we'll see, I think, more and more south to south countries, big countries, and the trade routes being shaped in that respect. Now, India has published plans, medium-term plans and very long-term plans. So it has shown its willingness to be part of that. But at the same time, we have to understand that the shipping industry is a well-established industry in terms of its norms, the way competition works, regulations, etc. So, in a nutshell, and really not to take too much time, of course, cooperation with international bodies is one requirement in order to be able to initially engage with those rules and then later on perhaps even shape them through this kind of engagement. Liberalization is also an important thing because, as Greek ship owners say, ships have propellers and they can easily move from one country to the rest. So things like they're very sensitive to taxation, to the rules, to the norms, to the requirements. For example, that India has to have an all-Indian crew. The new taxes, I think, have created an environment where a lot of ship ownership companies are moving their HQs to Singapore, etc., etc. So those are sensitive issues that you need to monitor and to ensure that you have a competitive regulatory landscape. The third requirement is to have the right personnel, to have educated people, both on the ship crew side and on the people running the companies on the various levels of operation, management, etc., etc. And this is a strength that India has clearly, in the sense that India has, very, very strongly educated people, and enough people. You're a hugely a country with #1 population in the world, so there's a lot of talent pool there. Finally, the last thing I would like to stress from the government's point of view is that you need to have the tenacity and the long-term view to be able to stick with the willingness to be part of this industry. You should not expect quick returns, easy results, but actually invest in this engagement and in this industry for a number of years and perhaps decades in order to be able to stand on your own feet and be able to be an equal partner with the other large nations of the world. We've seen that other countries do it, notably China. China has taken the long view, as they normally do. I think Greece, India, and China have a similar view of time because of our long histories. So we need to take the long-term view in order to be able to succeed. So that, if you like, as a first few thoughts and ideas about this important subject.
It's very helpful. And Feride, I know you have done quite a lot of work more generally on the economics of trade linkages and diversifying and thinking about South-South linkages in particular. What are some of the big lessons from the general work that you've done that might be applicable here in thinking about countries' motivations for diversifying their trade linkages, especially in the current geopolitical context?
Okay, thank you very much. Well, to answer that question, I actually want to underline 3 points here, some of which was brought up in discussions yesterday as well. First thing being, there was an emphasis on this building trade resilience by having more connectivity options. I think this is a very important point. We also see, to just give an example, when the right after the Russia-Ukraine conflict, well, we saw there's an alternative. The EU-China trade that was going over the northern routes over Russia, some of that got diverted to this Trans-Caspian trade route, which was trespassing Turkey. We saw between 2021 and 2022 container traffic in this route increasing by 33%. Then it dipped due to transshipment delays and problems at customs, etc. But we still expect that traffic to triple by 2030. Similar to the EMEC that's been discussed as an alternative to the Suez Canal. Now with the conflict in the Middle East, an alternative can be the Iraq Development Road Project, which links the Gulf with rail, and the Envision projects is a network of rail and road networks from the Gulf, from Basra in southern Iraq through Turkey, linking to EU markets vis-a-vis land routes or Turkish ports. So this guy, when it comes to, again, the alternative connectivity options, I want to also emphasize here the multimodal connectivity options, because initially some of these seem very costly, but they have the benefit of diversifying these routes, as well as connecting intra-regional trade, connecting inland regions, and also bringing some developmental benefits to the countries that they traverse. Coming to my second point, as just mentioned by Harris, if I pronounce that correctly, is this importance of enhancing South-South linkages. I'll tackle this point from the supply side. You looked from the demand side, but what we saw in the past 3 decades, we saw the emergence of new production hubs. So production capabilities in the past 3 decades we see have increasingly shifted eastwards. We all know China became the world's largest exporter. Other East Asian economies, as well as Turkey, India, have all increased their share of exports in total global exports. So as this has been happening, we still see that the trade infrastructure based on these Western colonial routes has not kept pace. So the trade infrastructure has not kept pace with this change in trade dynamics where new production centers are being formulated. I think this also gives us a clue how we came to this conversation about connectivity, because there's an obvious need for new connectivity linkages between new production hubs and new markets. Also, of course, the EU remains the most important demand market, but still we need to find better connections. In this regard, China's Belt and Road Initiative was the first large-scale effort to challenge this more northern, western-centric transportation connections. And I just want to note this too about the Chinese BRI. It's not just a single project. It is a series, that's how we see it. It's a series of national initiatives which serve a common purpose, objective of broadening connectivity connections. And to give one statistics, it has also changed the structure of Chinese exports. So we saw for the first time in 2020 that China's exports to BRI countries in its total exports surpass that of its exports to its traditional northern partners of US, EU, and Japan. So now 39% of China's exports go to BRI countries. So provided that, so that's the South-South linkages is very important to adapt to this changing trade dynamics. But I think this is very challenging still. We were just speaking with Mr. Flores here too. There is this the hegemony is difficult to break in the sense that when we look at maritime dominance, for instance, we see that the three biggest container shipping companies, Maersk, Mediterranean shipping company and so forth, 3 of them are based in Europe, and they account for 50% of the market. So this is, it's going to be a challenging way forward to break that dominance, the maritime dominance of the Western powers. My final point, or maybe I should stop now and then go for the next round, or do we have time?
No, go for it. Why don't you go for it?
One more thing. So another point that was raised yesterday, I wanted to touch upon is this, when we talk about economic corridors, this is one issue I work on. It's not just about cross-border connectivity, but it's also about connectivity within countries. This is something that, this is something important to also address the regional imbalances within countries. So in the Turkish example, we've always had these regional inequalities between our western provinces, which were strongly linked to EU markets. About 70% of Turkish exports going to the EU originate from the Western Marmara region, which also accounts for 50% of the national GDP, and also accounts for 45% of Turkey's highways, national highway system. So then we see the poorest 3 regions in the east of the country just accounting for 15% of national GDP, and these also lack these logistics and infrastructure connections. In fact, the poorest region, as measured by GDP per capita, Eastern Anatolia, has a close border with Armenia, so it's landlocked, and the connections are even more impeded. So I think that's another very key issue when we're talking about connectivity, not just cross-border, but within countries.
That's incredibly helpful and comprehensive. Thank you. I'm going to come next to Thomas and Renato. I'm going to ask you the same question from your different perspectives, which is, we've heard a bit about the changing nature of investment flows and actual trade flows as well, and in particular that some of the historic routes as well as firms remain a bit more static than the actual movement of shipping flows. How do you think about the future role of Poland and the European Union in that mix? And Renato, how do you think about the global architecture that allows a voice for dominant countries? So first Thomas and then Renato, from your particular perspectives.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much, organizers. Thank you for organizing this very interesting conference. Yes, the European Union, there is a big debate nowadays in European Union because actually we lost the first 2 decades of the 21st century. China took over from us, I would say not only the majority of shares in trade and investments, not only mostly in global south, but as also the Feride, Gulsen, İnan noticed that through the BRI initiative, they are now also taking initiative in also the communication corridors, not only in global south but also in the global north, because we have to remember that it's not only about BRI, it's also the joint project which probably will occur very soon of China and Russia. I'm speaking about the northern route, and we'll have another BRI, but not south but north, and it would be also the blow for Europe. Yes, I mean, but we have to also understand that this is also the matter of not only communication corridors and also the ship owners. Because nowadays it's in international trade. I mean, we have more than 90% carried by sea, but it's not the matter of the owner; it's the matter of the products you carry on. And if the flag state really does not matter nowadays, the exporter of the goods and services matters now more than before, and after establishing last 7 years 2 meta organizations with the free trade agreements. I mean, with the really the covering this more than 50% of the world GDP. So we have to ask ourselves in the European Union so that we can own the ship, but there will be no our products on board. And this would be the most challenging part for us. We have to, if we are thinking seriously about just rejoin this chain of not only production but also of the flow of products, we have to reinstall this infrastructure and architecture for free trade agreements between the European Union and global south. Without it, China and other countries will take all. Thank you.
I think it's interesting. At the current moment, it feels like many of us in parts of Europe will be the shipping owners, and the British will do the financing and legal advice, but the production is not going to be in our countries, and that's not a particularly satisfactory position on the regional imbalance question in particular. Rather, you're still flying the flag for BRICS in a series of conversations that we've been having, and so I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the future of global governance architecture around maritime questions in a way that gives a voice to Brazil and to other countries whilst ensuring that we're pursuing common shared global interests. What's the future of the BRICS, and what's the future of the appropriate architecture in that context?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I'll concentrate more on investment. There was a lot of talk already about connectivity and other things. And I thought the core of the panel was investment, and sometimes I said, oh my God, I made a mistake, but I was checking, so there is investment also in the list, thanks God. And maybe people concentrated on connectivity because they, my colleagues, like I myself, feel quite uneasy to talk about investment because that's what everybody wants. Half an hour from now, it will start in my hometown, the last day of G20, and the stress of the main conclusions will be investment for fighting hunger and poverty. So I was in a meeting of IBSA, which is a smaller set of BRICS, India, Brazil, and South Africa, and one of the key themes was investment for IBSA. So everybody wants investment, but investment is limited. And we must be serious and think about this. So what I was going to propose in a broader view is that we, Global South, not only BRICS, we should set a typology, or to speak in more common language, a list of investment modalities and priorities for us, Global South, in the case of maritime issues. So we should set those themes and modalities, and out of them we should discuss, do a homework, and extract priorities for asking for investment. Otherwise, it's a carnival. And it was not Brazil who invented carnival. It's becoming now with the investment first. Everybody wants investment. So we have to see what are the modalities which are convenient and available to the Global South. What are the topics which are important for us? Is it ports? Is it ship diversity? Is it seabed exploration technology? So we have to set priorities and then make a list to have a common effort for investment. And then we have two kinds of investment. No return investment, which is very important for the common good, not necessarily for one country. So I think the Global South should make a united voice in more investment to fight pollution in the seas, which is a very old problem, and to our great shame, we haven't coped with the problem of pollution. So this is one issue, a basic one, old one, that we should fight for. I'm not talking about plastic because everybody talked about plastics. Plastic is one dimension of the problem. The other dimension is investment with return, which we also want. It's very important for development. And then, as regards the sea, I would come with a very old idea. It's an idea that the father of the United Nations Law of the Sea, which is something very important, and I've not heard enough mentions to the United Nations Law of the Sea, which is behind everything that has been discussed here since yesterday. And Arvid Pardo, the Maltese ambassador, he always said, well, ventures in the oceans should be joint ventures. So I think it's very important, the second thing, if we think of return investment, that we don't think from a national viewpoint, but we think about joint venture. How can we get together with other Global South countries, with developed countries? We know they were very present here and very active, Norway and Netherlands, who have technology in the sea. How do we create joint ventures engaging other countries and also Global South countries which are landlocked? Because we don't forget that the sea is a common human heritage. So we should, again, set the example, trying to form partnerships with big coastal area countries like India, like my country, like China, but also Global South countries which are landlocked or have reduced coasts. Turkey, for instance, at the time of the Law of the Sea, Turkey didn't sign because Turkey has a very complicated coast, and the Turkish negotiations were not happy with the outcome. So that's, in my view, is the way to frame the discussion of investment in terms of the sea. Thank you.
Very helpful indeed, Rajan. A very compelling call to action as well. Feride, you've done a lot of work in the Malaysian context on SDGs, and so I'm interested, as we think about how investment flows are being reshaped, the balance of power is shifting. How you think the lessons from your work, what they indicate in terms of how we ought to engage with this new political order to affect and progress global economic equity in particular?
Thank you. Mr. Flores has taken some of my talking points. Maybe I should have shut down my... Yes, I put it very small, no. But I can elaborate it a bit more, because I think finally now the South, we in the South, we have a voice. The engine of growth as well as the production hub has indeed moved to this part of the world. And again, because we're so integrated into the global economy as well as the global supply chain, we finally now have a voice. And if we do combine our priorities, and if we do communicate it very clearly to our Western partners, I think cooperation can take in the form of technical assistance as well as sharing of best practices. So when we think about communicating our priorities clearly, it's common sense. But when you try to prioritize the long list of interests of different groups, different member countries, it is not as easy as we say. And I come from Malaysia, and we're a part of ASEAN, and our voice as one is very difficult sometimes it's very difficult to decide on different things like data localization as well as other technical assistance sectors, especially when we try to renegotiate the new ASEAN-China 3.0 free trade agreement. So this is, again, it's very much common sense, but on the ground, it is not easy, even from the ASEAN perspective. So coming back to technical assistance and sharing of best practices, of course, we in the developing world, we can learn from developed countries, from their experiences in overcoming trade and investment issues. But we also in the global South, we can also share and showcase our strength in sustainable fishing practices. We've talked about indigenous knowledge. We can also showcase our coral reef and marine life conservation efforts, and also explore further grounds for collaboration with our Western partners. We can learn from the West about waste management, but we can also learn about upcoming technologies and innovations that can monitor and reduce carbon emissions through various working groups. I emphasize on conservation because for decades, we have poured in our energy and resources in liberalizing our trade, and also attracting our FDIs within our shores. If we put the same intensity of effort in conserving our marine wildlife, we will not be in this climate change crisis we are in today. So maritime trade sector, fishing and transportation accounts for about 3% of our greenhouse gas emissions. So it's small now, but by 2050, we can see this number triple to about 10%. And again, sharing of technology and knowledge and innovation is very much needed. For example, the UK has technology where emissions can be reduced through space technology. And I'm sure other countries in the South may have innovations in other fields that can be applied to the maritime trade industries. So I bear somewhat of a bad news, because we do think that, okay, to cut carbon emissions, the answer is renewable energy. Ladies and gentlemen, studies have shown that this is not true, especially for high or big polluting countries. renewable energy will not be as effective as technology and also innovation. So this is where, again, our Western partners with our partners here in this region, we can work together to, again, exchange knowledge and also share technologies so that these two platforms can lead to trust building between the developed and developing countries. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. Well, that's been a very comprehensive set of submissions. We've got 15 minutes left, so we're going to open up. I'll take questions in groups of 3, if possible. Name, organization, and succinct question, please. Over to you first.
Hi. Thank you, Chair. A very interesting conversation indeed. My question will focus on the...
Name and organization.
Sorry. I'm Rahul Banerjee. I run a think tank in Delhi. It's called Rice in a House. We specialize in foreign policy planning. My question would be to the panel, anyone who wishes to answer. So with climate change and the melting ice in Arctic, we see new trade routes emerging in the Arctic region. And this will definitely play out a very big role in the changing power balance ratio within the region. How does my colleagues from Europe view this, especially with China, along with Russia, India as well? We have aspirations in the Arctic, not just scientific or environmental. We have security aspirations. How does it play out for you people in Europe, in the Arctic region? And definitely, what impact would it have on the existing sea routes, especially if we see the Red Sea corridor? Yeah, that is it.
Yes, thank you very much. Abla Abdulatif, Egyptian Center for Economic Studies, Egypt. I wanted first to second what you said, Turkey, about Turkey and the importance of having the infrastructure corridors. It's not only the maritime, it's also the trains and the roads and so on, and this is key and already is playing a major role in Egypt. But my question to actually all of you, you said that the voice of the South is now being heard. It's not heard loud enough. Okay, there's a need for a lot more. A good starting point is for the countries to get together and have a framework for investment. BRICS is a starting point for having, again, the Global South get together, partly at least. But I think, and this is what I want to see the reaction, that only through a change in the Bretton Woods Agreement itself, with a proper division of power in the world, will we hear the actual voice. And only then there could be a positive impact, especially on climate issues. Africa is 3% responsible for the mess and carrying all the burden, just as an example. Thank you.
Very well. I think there's a question halfway through the room, and we'll come back for a further set.
Okay, thank you. My name is Oumaima Bourriba. I'm an economist at the Policy Center for the New South. It's a Moroccan think tank. And I have 2 questions. The first one is for Mr. Thomas. You've raised an interesting point regarding the challenges of the EU, the fact that they can own their ships, but they will not have their products in it. I would like to ask you how they can balance this between these 2 interesting points. My second question probably is for the panel. We're talking about shaping the investment flows. My question is related to FDIs. To attract FDIs in the maritime industry, our developing countries should base their policies mainly on the conventional instruments, and I mean by that profitability, economic and political stability, and so on and so forth, or they have to put into place new instruments to attract this kind of investments. Thank you.
Great. Well, we're going to come back to another round in a bit, but why don't we tackle those 4 questions? So Thomas, I wondered if you wanted to start, Thomas, from the European and Polish view on either the Arctic trade routes or the more direct question at the end.
Yes, with Arctic, yes. I mean, I know that India is very active in Arctic Council, but I hope somebody from Norway who could tell you more. Because actually how we look at the particular situation, I mentioned the North Route, but this is not only the matter of the North Route and the activities of China and Russia, but this how the North Route would be actually facilitated, because if it would be facilitated the same way like it was in the Indian Ocean, so it would be also the kind of the confusion and the feeling of threat from India as well. And this feeling is also in the Nordic Council and the Scandinavian countries. We are the part of the Baltic countries as well, Poland, and we look at this. Let's say, first of all, we have the United Nations Convention, and we have the assumption that the Arctic Council is, like you mentioned, this. If we would like to do something in Arctic, we should get together. I mean, it should be not venture of China and Russia, but it would be joint venture. But this is the big question, and there's a question of the joint action of India and other like-minded countries in Arctic Council. We were why I said that we are just lost the last 25 years, because we introduced within Europe, we introduced the integrated maritime policy. But you know, this we have to remember that this Europe is only the part of this global chain of supply and production, and if we would like to have a real bigger role of the European Union, we should be better interconnected, also in the sense what was mentioned, that the better involvement of the European Union in the maritime investments and maritime governance. Thank you.
Thank you. There was a very appropriate challenge about the weight and voice of the South still, and that a more fundamental institutional change is required to put it in its right place. Any takers for that particular challenge? Huita, why don't we go, and I'll come back to you.
I will incorporate the two questions about voice and also the FDIs. That brings me to my second talking point. And again, of course, we can collaborate in both either binding or non-binding platforms. And in my observation, binding free trade agreements with deeper commitments have always worked in trying to shape and guide the behavior of member countries. So I draw attention to the most comprehensive future trade deal, which has been signed. It's the original name is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and then with the US pulling out, it is now the CPTPP, championed by different countries in this region. So again, it's a very futuristic agreement whereby it looks at not just traditional trade chapters like trade in goods, trade in services, and as well as investment chapters. It looks at non-traditional trade chapters like the government procurement chapter, labor chapter, as well as the environment chapter. So for the past 2 days, I've been hearing about trade policies being important levers to guide or to guide countries to help combat climate change. And even though it's not ideal, but we do see that free trade agreements are are used to change behaviors of different member countries. We see that through America's Inflation Reduction Act. We see that through the EU's deforestation bill, as well as the new CBAM that's going to be introduced soon. So it just struck me when I was trying to answer the questions as my talking points, why wasn't the shipping industry included in free trade agreements? It seems such a straightforward way, but I do feel that either we can build on the existing free trade agreements like the CPTPP or even the RCEP or even the RCEP. I know that India is not party to any of those, but again, we in the South, when we talk about our voice, this is something that we can do to formalize that voice and to formalize our priority. And the only way to go is go binding. We have to be bound. Thank you.
Thank you. We're gonna, Harry, I saw you had a quick voice, so when I come to you, and then Renata, and we'll finish off with 2 further questions.
Yeah,
after.
just a brief note on themes that have already been heard. The question is, how do we make, like Abla said, the voices heard of the South more heard, but at the same time, how do we see the whole thing as a JV? How do we see more? And I think Julia mentioned it, that our voices now are heard because we're a bigger part of the production capability and bigger part of the FDI. So the first step is actually to engage with the current rules. So be part of WTO, et cetera, to be able to bring in the investment, be part of the world as it is, and as a result grow, and then your voice can be heard. So that's one requirement. And the second part, of course, is then to cooperate more in the South. You have a number of fora of engagement. I'm thinking of SARC, for example, the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, et cetera, in order to increase the clout of the voices, to have a common voice, so that it's actually a voice which is bigger than any of the parts. Egypt on its own cannot be heard, but as part of a wider group can be heard. And then, as always, the new consensus comes from productive disagreement. So then you need to have the disagreements in the points that you have to disagree in order to settle down to a new set of rules that will be more inclusive, that will be more conducive to the environmental challenges that we have to face, et cetera, those points that the Global South rightly so creates. So I think we need to have one leg in and one leg out if we are to have any chance of real success.
Renata, and then we'll open up to 2 more questions.
3 very quick and short takes on the questions. First, about joint ventures. My idea is much simpler. I'm not talking about treaties. I'm not talking about a big initiative like BRICS. No. I'm talking about associations, simple associations between countries, among countries, not necessarily only Global South. I mentioned Norway and Netherlands, who are very attractive depending on the technology you desire. So, but joint ventures, well defined for a specific investment. This is not so complicated, and you don't need to mobilize or change the world before you start to do this. It's a very practical suggestion. Second, my colleague from Rabat, you raised the point of FDI, which is very subtle, because FDI is investment, and it is not exactly investment. FDI is more specific. So what I mentioned regarding investment in big, huge regional or ocean projects. FDI in a specific port is another thing in my view, okay? They are similar, but it's another thing. So I'm talking more, what I said, is more about investment, big investment involving big things. So we want to improve all the ports in Southeast Asia. That's too much, but it's an example more in the sense of what I said. And thirdly, allow me to represent diplomatically the broad view of my country as regards China, Russia, North Pole, and all that. Well, my country is a country which thinks that we all have the duty nowadays to fight for peace. So my country is a peaceful country and struggles for peaceful solution of international issues. So as regards, for instance, the North Pole, I think that, okay, there are issues of investment, there are issues of divisions. As my colleague from Poland mentioned, the United Nations Law of the Sea has a chapter on the Arctic. Maybe, and I subscribe to this view, it has become outdated. It needs to be updated. But okay, so let us talk about the Arctic, but within the framework of the law of, yes, I know that because there is always the idea of confrontation. Country A is using country B to do that. Well, every country A in the world will use every country X in the world if this is a way to have access of something. The world is competitive, but we need to follow multilateral procedures. And so let us talk about the Arctic, but let us talk in a multilateral framework. And
Great.
if there is something that we are not happy with, let us, within the framework of the United Nations Law of the Sea, see what can be done.
Thank you.
That's my view, and that's how we, most of the Brazilians, think about this issue.
Yeah.
Try to avoid confrontational views, but peaceful solutions and dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thomas, I'm going to break the rule of the 5-minute constraint I've been given. So brief word to you and then 2 quick questions, we'll wrap up.
Yes, thank you. Because as a former diplomat, I have to diplomatic mode. So, and excuse me, with all respect, but global commons are global commons, and we have to treat global commons as global commons, not as commons of belonging to somebody, to countries.
Law.
No, just it.
Under the United Nations
Under the United law, and
as
this
we
is
wish.
not as we. I mean, yes. I mean, let's say, sir, as I said, we have United Nations Convention. This, as you mentioned, Arvid Pardo, and this is Global Commons. He was, as you know, the promoter of Global Commons, and let us keep this Global Commons. Thank you.
Right, two quick questions, and I'm going to get one here and then one here. I know I promised you one, so we're going to come to you as well.
Hello, my name is Sridhar Rathi. I am from Institute of Mass Communication. My question is that investment is important, and it is being done in the world. And the major example would be of China, where they invest in other countries. But the thing is, at what cost does that investment come? Because either their ports are taken, or they are brought in a debt trap, or things are done so that country can't heal up, or they are under a pressure.
That's very good. Very clear. What the cost of investment beyond the financials? Midway here, and then we'll come here.
Yes, myself, HK Mena. I'm preparing for UPSC IS. So, as you all talking about investment, and investment is the key priority for any of the development. So, with respect to India, there are domestic sources of investment and foreign sources, but when it comes to foreign sources, so whether government debt or external commercial borrowings, means these investments are being sourced to countries on the basis of credit ratings which are being given by these credit rating agencies like Moody's, Fitch and S&P. But like there are concerns, especially
we're going to have to push you to a question.
Yes.
What's the specific question?
Concerns is that like what are the mechanisms that these S&P credit rating agencies are adopting while giving credit ratings to the countries? And there is concerns from the India's economic survey that India being a major economy.
I think we've got the question. I really appreciate it. Thank you. I'm going to final question to you.
Yeah, we have been investing in India in different type of model. One is called PP model, where public is involved. If we involve public also, that will be a more successful, and we can have a one banking system like BRICS and G20 and other. We are here for first time, so we can have a bank like Sagar Manthan or something like that. Thank you.
Very innovation. So, one final word for each person, closing remarks, or you can take a stab at any of these 3 questions. The cost of investment, including when it's loading you with debt, mechanisms for credit rating agency assessments, and a very innovative proposal for public investment. You can take any of those or your final closing remark. Why don't we go all the way down the table, starting with Harry?
Okay, well, I'll just say one word on the cost, but also we should not forget the benefit of investment as well. Governments and investors have this love-hate relationship. You know, they love to hate each other, and it's true. And many countries make mistakes. They give part of their infrastructure for too little, but in this process we all learn. And there's also the possibility to learn from the mistakes of others. Now we have a lot of tools. There's PPP investment, there's concession, there's straight sales. You can do whatever, every government can do whatever they want. And of course, this is also a power relationship. There's governments are sovereign, they have all the power, but then, you know, the investment can be large vis-a-vis the size of the GDP or whatever, so they're inclined to give a lot in order to be able to attract it. So all in all, I think this is a learning process, and it's a process that can empower the governments ultimately, and what the government should, the only mistake they can make, which is very difficult to take back, is to actually give out the goods that they have. So if there's a horizon where in 10 years, in 20 years, there's going to be another recession of concession, then they'll learn from the relationship, and the next round will be much better. I think that's what we should be doing.
Right, thank you. Yes, I mean, it was mentioned before. I mean, we have this public-private partnership scheme, and I think it should be also applied to the multi-governmental international scheme for investments in maritime governance and in ports, because if you are building a port, it serves multinational purpose. It's not only if you are going to build a huge port in Andaman Nicobar Islands, it will serve the half of the world actually. So it's not only for India, it's half of the world. So it should be a consortium of nations, and it should be not only burdened and on the shoulders of one government, but it should be a let's say consortium of governments. Thank you.
Okay. Well, since the panel is about investment, I'll comment on that briefly. Well, we all want good investments, and as you mentioned, we are all critical when we don't get the investments we want. But I mean, I'll give you an example of something I looked at recently when we were looking at Eastern European economies after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. We see 60% of their investment comes from the EU, and the majority of these were in medium to high-tech technologies. But this also meant that there was structural reform, institutional alignment with the EU, and you know there was a whole process behind that. Then we looked at as a comparison to Central Asia after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, and they received more investments and more resource-based products, I mean, from the US, Russia, and you know, other economies as well. So, I mean, good investments, I mean, if we want investments that will make our countries productive, that also comes with, I mean, the different measures in terms of business environments or, you know, structural reforms. The one last point I want to make also is regarding this South-South connectivity. So it was discussed briefly yesterday, but I think in addition to, you know, we talk about physical infrastructure, we talk about aligning our software, our customs, logistics, etc., you know, the kind of soft aspects of trade. The other thing which I think is really important is this, to build these robust financial and trade relations between southern economies, because I mean we see when we talk about the G20, the rich countries, they have actually very strong institutional connections, whether it's, you know, trade relationships at the firm level, very strong relationships. And if we're talking about organizations like BRICS or G20, I mean, when we look at emerging markets, we have to substantiate that with more kind of, whether it's trade, investment, I mean, more concrete institutional initiatives, firm-level partnerships, etc., to make it a reality. That's all.
Thank you. Two global points which I think were clear in this panel. The first one, and this was expressed in different ways by the three speakers who preceded me, is that within this beautiful thing, Sagar, within the oceans, there are market structures. Many are invisible ones, but there are many market structures at play within this space. And this can nullify some investment ideas. So the situation is much more complex than what is being written here in the summary of the session. because you are thinking about investment within an area where there is a complex, even in different layers of market structures, which must be taken into account if you think about investment. First thing. Second, the ocean is not a continuous, as we think, and not this nice heavenly place. Since the UN law of the seas, but even before, since the Phoenicians, since the Grotius and the Portuguese, it is squared and divided. You have national areas, you have the area, which is a common heritage of humanity, and all that. All these areas are subject to subtle constraints or ambiguities, or even, as was reminded here recently, maybe injustices. For instance, you take an island, an isolated island, which counts economically zero, it can have an exclusive economic zone much bigger than a big country, very important, who has a very short stretch of coast, and his exclusive economic area is nothing. So you have a lot of injustices, of disparities within this ocean, which is not so free and so continuous as we think. So again, this constraints, this set boundaries on the possibilities of investments, on the meaning of ventures and all that. So
Very
these
helpful.
are two hidden factors that must also be taken into account.
Thank you very much. Very quick final word to you, Teresa.
Okay, very quick. The cost of investments and trade that are not sustainable is the backlash of Mother Nature. And we are seeing that now. In the past, when we talk about free trade agreements, it's all about cutting costs, pushing costs to the lowest possible without tariff rates, trying to abolish or eliminate non-tariff measures. But most importantly, we were encouraging, or it was the norm for investors and also firms to externalize the cost of pollution towards the environment. And so this is why the carbon taxing, carbon pricing framework is very much needed. But I do feel that here in the Global South, again, we do not have the same transition period as that of our Western partners. We are still seeing countries like Malaysia who have just tried to shift towards a targeted approach to energy subsidies. We still give out subsidies. So from that blanket energy subsidy to introducing taxes on energy or fuel to that of carbon pricing would be a bit of a longer period for us. So yeah, that's my take. Thanks.
Brilliant. Well, a bit of a marathon at the end. So thank you all very much. The brief for today was how we think about balancing different voices and interests in shaping investment flows. And for a good demonstration of that on this panel and in the audience, thank you all very much indeed.